what's up guys, it's Bakes here and thank you for joining me for day number 30 of my 31 Days of Horror. I said in yesterday's review that the last two movies for my 31 days were going to be more so family friendly slash kids horror movies, if that's the way you want to word it. So you shouldn't be surprised by the title of today's movie that I'm reviewing from 2015. Here I have Goosebumps, or the Goosebumps movie as some people like to call it. So just a little bit of context for myself in this movie before I get into the plot and my thoughts on it. It should be no surprise I had to put on my Goosebumps shirt for this. I have a handful of Goosebumps shirts actually, which gets to my point that I am a pretty big Goosebumps fan. I grew up loving the books. I feel like I read most of them throughout my time growing up, and I still actually have a fairly big Goosebumps book collection in the other room. Of course, I love the TV show. I mean, Goosebumps was more so a thing for kids of the 90s. I was born in 2001, but still a fair bit of overlap there with the Goosebumps culture. Whenever we had to read something in the school library, I was always going over to where I knew the Goosebumps books were, and always looking at the cover arts as well. I always found them to be like really fucking cool. And then, like I said, the TV show as well. So when this movie was announced back in 2015, I would have been 14 years old. Probably still like a little bit too old for a movie like this one, I guess, but I was like fucking with it heavy. I was so keen to check this one out, and I remember going to see it in cinemas and having a blast with this movie, to be honest. I know it's gonna sound like kind of fucking lame, but this movie for me was kind of like my version of the Monster Squad, the film from the 80s. As I said, I know that's gonna sound kind of lame, and it's the best like comparison I could think of, because like I wasn't born in the 80s. I didn't grow up with the Monster Squad. I didn't have nostalgia with it. I actually saw the Monster Squad like fairly late in my life. But kids of the 80s, would have nostalgia with those monsters and seeing like these kids team up to take them out and whatever. This is sort of my version of that, as in you have a bunch of kids in this movie plus an adult teaming up to take on these monsters, and all the monsters are ones that I grew up with because I read the books and watched the TV show. So, like I said, kind of my version of Monster Squad. I know, again, people are going to think that's pretty lame or whatever, but yeah, I think that's sort of the case with this one. But getting into the plot for the Goosebumps movie here. So in this movie, we have a boy named Zach, or a teenage boy, 16 or something, played by Dylan Moynette, who moves to a new town because his mum is going to be the new vice principal at this school. And, he's not really for it. He wants to stay back in the town he was in and whatever, but he's trying to make the most of it. Moving into his new house, he finds out that a girl lives next door, and there's sort of the relationship slash friendship going on in this movie. But it turns out that her dad is R.L. Stine, who, for those who don't know, is the author of the Goosebumps books, and he's played by Jack Black in this movie. Anyway, one night he sneaks into the house because he thinks the girl is in danger, and while in there he finds all these original Goosebumps manuscripts on this shelf. But the thing about the books is they're locked up with like a key and everything, like they're not meant to be opened. Through some unfortunate events, the books open, and the monsters come out of the book, and now they're in the real world. And one of the monsters that comes from the book is probably the face of the Goosebumps franchise, Slappy the Dummy, and he's got this new mission now to unleash all of the monsters and take out Stein so that they never have to be locked up again. And now Zach, R.L. Stein, the daughter, and one other kid that Zach makes friends with have to team up to capture all the monsters and put them back in the book. So it's a bit kind of like Jumanji and those sort of things, obviously with a Goosebumps twist to it. Towards the back of this review, I'll explain how I would have preferred the Goosebumps movies to be done like in the future, like if we ever get any more Goosebumps movies, because I remember a lot of people like not really digging how they approached this movie, like when it was announced, and the storyline that it was going for. But with that being said, for this movie and the way that they wanted to go about it, I think this is potentially the best result that we could have gotten, to be honest. This movie is really a lot of fun, and as a Goosebumps fan, there are so many Easter eggs and shout-outs in this movie. Like, even scenes like where we're not just specifically looking at the monsters or characters from the book, like just so many references and things like that. So as a Goosebumps fan, it really scratches that itch. It's almost too reliant on them, because I think, and I also kind of know, a casual fan of Goosebumps or someone who isn't really familiar with Goosebumps at all, they're not going to get those references, and a lot of it's going to go over their head, and it's not going to quite hit the same for them. So it's kind of like, if you are a Goosebumps fan, I feel like this will satisfy a certain spot for you. But if you're not a Goosebumps fan, or just sort of casual, a lot of what's going on in this movie is just going to, not really hit that spot, because it's going to be going over your head, if you know what I mean. You can tell a team of people who like really cared about the books and the show, just Goosebumps in general, put a lot of effort into this, and that's something that I really enjoy about this movie. So getting into some other things that I really like about this movie, first of all, I really love the humor in this movie. A lot of it is like really good adult jokes that obviously are going to go over kids' heads, but I really like that they squeeze them in there, and they're not completely all watered down and dumbed down. Of course, there are going to be a handful that are played towards kids, and the humor is more targeted towards them. But there really are a lot of smart and subtle jokes in there that are quick and punchy, and like I said, don't play it down for the kids. So I like when a movie targeted towards the young audience can squeeze in like some jokes for the adults as well. So that's really nice. Now, I wouldn't really necessarily say this movie's genuinely scary, but I think there are some moments that pack in thrills, if that's the word that you want to use. I think it does it pretty well. I can imagine that there's certain scenes in here that will maybe frighten a few younger kids. Like there's this really cool scene where like the collection of monsters like band together on the school football field, and like it actually seems like really intimidating. It's like, oh shit, look how many there are, and there's so many cool designs and creatures. And again, just for someone who knows the books and all the references and Easter eggs of all the monsters and everything, it's so fucking cool. But I can imagine some kids being like, oh shit, that's actually pretty crazy. And when they do swarm in on the school, even me, I was like, fuck, this is like pretty wild. And I thought that is a lot of fun. Another really cool like chase scene with a monster that I think is like really underrated is the werewolf chase scene in the supermarket. Like I found that to be a lot of fun. Obviously a reference to the werewolf of Fever Swamp there. And this might sound a little bit controversial, but that one scene alone, like I genuinely mean this, could be one of the best / most fun werewolf depictions ever, because I just love that it's clearly a kid that's been turned into a werewolf. Like he's still wearing like his gym shorts or basketball shorts. He's got his sneakers that are ripped through because he's a werewolf now. I just really like the design. I really like the depiction of how like they can distract him with like dog toys and everything, but he's also like really menacing the way he like runs across the aisles and like genuinely sniffing them out. And he does like a cool like Freddy Krueger thing where he puts his claws between two trucks and like scrapes it across. I'm like, that's actually really fucking cool as well. The monsters overall, I mean, their designs are mixed, and I say mixed because most of them are CGI, and some of the CGI holds up, and I'm really saying some, it's a bit of a stretch. Most of it unfortunately doesn't, which is a little bit annoying. I remembered the CGI being much better, but sometimes that's the case. You just remember it differently, thinking back on a film. But of course, whenever they're practical effects or someone in a costume, it does look like really fucking cool. So the monsters, it's a mixed bag. Again, it mostly comes down to nostalgia. Like even when it is a CGI creature and it's very clear that it's CGI, still just going, oh my gosh, that's the abominable snowman from Pasadena from the book. It's something where it doesn't bother me as much because it's hitting a reference that I really like. The rest of the cast in this movie, Jack Black, again, he's someone that I feel like over the past handful of years has been mixed with people just because he appears in so many different things. But I think he does a good job in this movie, and he plays R.L. Stine very different to how he plays majority of his characters in other movies, so that's nice. Dylan Moynette, I wish he did more things. I'm a big fan of Dylan, not just his movies, but him doing his music, and it seems to be more recently he's focused more on his music, which is fine. But I really wish he would do more acting, because I feel like the last thing I seen him in was Scream 5. And he's a really cool actor. And in this movie, like, it doesn't matter that it's a Goosebumps movie and he might just feel a little bit stupid or whatever. He's like smashing it out of the park. The cast is like all really good. Even the daughter, I don't know the actress that plays her, but she's cool. And the kid that plays Champ, who is Zach's friend in this movie, he looks exactly like the guy who plays Neville Longbottom in Harry Potter. I'm like, fuck, if they need to recast Neville Longbottom, he would be perfect for that. He's probably a bit old now because this movie's 10 years old, but yeah, the cast in this movie also do a really good job. So wrapping up this review, as I said, as someone who is a moderate Goosebumps fan, for what they were aiming for this movie to be, I feel like it mostly delivers on, that target, as in it's got the thrills for younger audiences. I guess it's got the scares and everything like that. It's got some really good humor, which, as I said, I like that it's not all dumbed down for a kid audience, and not everything's fart jokes and stuff like that. It's got some really actually funny moments in it that I'm thinking back on some quotes and everything now that genuinely make me laugh. Like I said, I'm not a massive die-hard Goosebumps fan. If you gave me trivia, I wouldn't ace it 100%, but there definitely are bigger Goosebumps fans out there. And I remember when the plot for this movie was brought up and everything, they were a little bit butthurt about, what this movie was going to be. And I think what they wanted this movie to be was just a little bit too unrealistic. So after I give my rating out of 10, I'll tell you where I feel like they could go with future Goosebumps movies now that what they were aiming for with this type of film has been covered and everything. But like I said, this movie also just the nostalgia and references and things like that for me, it just hits, Like I said, there's a character in this movie called Champ, and it sounds so stupid, like it's Champ, short for champion, and you're like, what type of name is that for a kid? But like, if you remember reading Goosebumps books, there was so many characters with stupid names like that, and you're like, why the fuck are they named that? But I love that it's carried over into this movie. The girl next door character reference without spoiling anything. Even before the monsters are unleashed, you get a Cuckoo Clock of Doom reference, and it's like, it's so fucking cool. Even the closing credits where it does like immersive looks into the original artworks for the books and everything, so fucking cool. Like I was ready to wrap this movie up, and then I saw what the closing credits were, and it reminded me. I'm like, nah, I gotta sit through this whole thing again. Like, really fucking cool. So giving this one a rating out of 10. To be honest, it's probably more so around the 7.5 mark out of 10. But just purely off nostalgia, I got to bump it up to an 8. It's not going to be an 8 for everyone, but for me, like I said, for what this movie was aiming to be, it's an 8. So, again, just off nostalgia as well. Like I said, I know a lot of people who are diehard Goosebumps fans. They wanted like a full movie adaptation of some of the greats, where with this approach, they, made it meta. They added R.L. Stine to the movie as a character himself, and instead of basing it around one book alone, like The Haunted Mask or Night of the Living Dummy, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of a niche one, Ghost Speech or whatever, they just merged them all into one story, and a lot of people weren't quite happy with that. But I think, with what they were aiming for, they did a good job. In the future, now that this idea has been covered, I think they should do book adaptations, and I'm not saying that they need to do them in order, like, the first book is Welcome to Dead House, and then Stay Out of the Basement, and then, what's the third one? Monster Blood and everything. They don't need to do them in sequence. They don't even need to be full-length movies, like, an hour 30 or whatever. They can just be, like, pushing an hour if they really need to. I think kind of go the Fear Street trilogy route. Not quite. Like, the Fear Street books were a little bit more niche and not quite the world-conquering Goosebumps, so they were able to make it a bit more adult and taboo and, have gory kills and everything. You can't quite do that with a name like Goosebumps. But I think, push the envelope. Who owns the rights for Goosebumps at the moment? I think it's Disney now, so I really doubt this will happen. But just, push it a bit more. Have characters genuinely get hurt and just like really go for it, like adapt like some of the well-known stories, and if you have a good script for a more niche story, go for it. But like I said, just go the Fear Street route, I reckon. Don't have the movies tie in together. Don't make it like a fucking MCU situation where you need to watch this one to understand this one and whatever. Just make them stand alone, almost like the Masters of Horror, to be honest. Like just each episode is roughly like 45-50 minutes to an hour, something like that. Push the envelope a little bit. The kids have grown up from reading Goosebumps in, the early 2000s and the 90s. And just adapt it like that. I think that would be really cool. But I've done a lot of rambling. This is going to be one of my longer 31 days reviews, obviously. I'm checking the runtime now, and yeah, for sure. But thank you for joining me for day 30, and tomorrow is going to be Halloween. Again, it's a family friendly kids horror movie, but there's always got to be some room for gateway horror guys, so yeah, don't be butthurt about it. But I think you're going to have fun with tomorrow's movie because it's one that I genuinely love, and I was super excited to give it a rewatch and talk about it for day number 31. So thank you for joining me for today's review, guys. Let me know your thoughts on Goosebumps and if you're a Goosebumps fan and whatever. And I'll see you tomorrow for Halloween. Peace, guys.